Hello, and welcome to the Precision Teaching Podcast. Joining me tonight is my co-host, Doug Kostowitz.
Hello, everybody.
Well, let's not waste any time and get right into the podcast. We have 3 announcements tonight, and I think a significant announcement for everyone is that our podcast is now available on iTunes.
It is, I checked. So
download it.
Yes.
It might be easier for some people to subscribe through iTunes because what you can do through iTunes, you can still go to the website, but if you subscribe through iTunes, and what will happen is each month when we upload it, it will automatically download, and it'll be right there in your iTunes client. It's very efficient.
Getting it out to the masses. Now it's a great, I guess, well, I'm not an Apple person, but I do have an iPod, so go figure. But
well, iTunes is not specifically for the Apple. Anybody can use it. In fact, I would recommend all of the users, if you go, the way you would find us, this podcast is technically called Podcast Manna. I know I should have renamed it, but maybe I'll try at some point later. But if you go to iTunes and you search Precision Teaching, you'll see Podcast Manna. You go to that and you'll see the available episodes to download. But it would be great if you rate us there. You can give from 1 star to 5 stars. And the more people that visit that site, the more traffic we'll have and the more visibility we'll have, which is always nice, getting the word out, as you said.
Yep, definitely.
The other announcement that we have a conference coming up in May, which is the Association for Behavior Analysis, and this year it will be held in Phoenix, and I know, Doug, you're going. I will be going there. But there is a chart share that will be hosted, and there are a number. If you haven't been to a chart share, you really need to get to see one, because they're a wonderful opportunity to see the standard Celeration charts highlighted, and you also get to meet interesting precision teaching people.
They are a lot of fun, and they're fairly crowded, if I remember correctly.
They are. And in fact, each year, it seems they get more crowded. I think Malcolm Neely or someone was actually collecting data and put it on a chart. I haven't seen that chart, but I know the last time I looked at it, there was a nice acceleration from what I can recall. There'll be other sessions, but definitely check out the chart share at ABA.
Heck, there might be enough people that they might have to go down to 10-second sprints instead of a full minute.
Yeah, maybe. That'd be great. Here, the last announcement. This is a personal announcement. I have 2 chapters that I have recently submitted, and both of them deal with precision teaching. The one chapter describes how to chart, and it covers the basic conventions. But the other chapter that I'm very pleased that I just finished covers how can precision teaching be used with kids with autism, and it's broken down into 3 different distinct sections. One is why use the standard Celeration chart. The second is how do learning channels help, and the third talks about behavioral fluency. But the first one, I'm really actually proud of myself that I finally was able to get it done. But that first part shows a nice intervention of what social stories looks like when it's recharted on a standard Celeration chart. And I know you're familiar with it because you had some input in looking at that data. And it's always neat when you take what people chart and then you rechart it and say, okay, what is this chart really showing me?
It's very telling, and in fact, I cannot wait to read the chapter. I've not been privy to that yet, so hopefully at some point I'll take a look at it. But just helping out with charting and looking at it and making sure everything was going okay, it, those kind of things are just really neat.
Yes, the chart or the chapters haven't been published yet, but anyone who would be interested in reviewing them, please feel free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to send off an attachment, and you can let me know what you think. Well, Doug, I think that's do you have any announcements that I missed?
Well, it's it's just turned spring and there was snow outside. So depending on where you are, we're trying to figure out if it's spring or winter yet. So that's the only announcement I have.
Yeah, that's Pennsylvania weather for you.
Yep.
Well, we have an article to review today, and our article is called Frequency in a Standard Celeration Chart, Necessary Components of Precision Teaching. This article was written by Pat McGreevy, and it was written in 1984. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Doug and I we thought that would be a neat idea is when we review these articles, we do open this up for people to make suggestions, but in the absence of suggestions, we thought it would be a nice idea to look at seminal articles that are foundational or talk about foundational concepts. And I don't know if you can get any more foundational than frequency in the standard acceleration chart.
Not at all.
Both of course, precision teaching, the main driver of precision teaching is the standard acceleration chart. If you don't have the standard acceleration chart, you really can't say you're doing precision teaching. I know some people think that's a little bit heavy-handed, excuse me, but that really is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I don't know if you wanted to dive into the article, but the article discusses variants of the chart still are not the chart.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's save that for a little bit. Matter of fact, why don't we go through this article in from the beginning to, we're not going to go over piece by piece, but let's lay the foundation for what this article talked about. And what I like about the opening few paragraphs is when McGreevy is talking about how precision teaching, how it relates to the science of behavior and beyond that. And I don't think that a lot of people who are familiar with precision teaching understand this, but I don't know that people outside of precision teaching understand this, that Lindsley took two fundamental concepts from B.F. Skinner, and those two fundamental concepts were having a frequency measurements, or what Skinner would sometimes call rate of responding, and of course the standard acceleration chart, and he took that from the cumulative record, or having a universal display of behavior. The article goes on, and really I think it lays a very nice foundation for explaining what the standard acceleration chart is, and why frequency is very important. Mm-hmm. I copied down one of the lines that from McGreevy, and he says the purpose of this article is to demonstrate that frequency in a standard acceleration chart in its original size should be retained as necessary components of precision teaching. I found that kind of interesting, because when he said that, I'm thinking like, okay, wait a minute, how could you not do precision teaching if you don't have frequency or the standard acceleration chart?
Right.
You can chart other things other than frequency. You can chart duration and you can chart latency on the chart, but I think it's fair to say most precision teachers are interested and use frequency measurements, and of course they all put it on the standard celeration chart.
Mm-hmm. What makes for comparisons, giving that equal measurement or the same measurement using frequency, allows for then comparison between charts, allowing the overlay. And because you have the standard acceleration chart, and in the past, I forget the name of the paper, but being able to lay them on top of each other and making comparisons, because everything is in its exact place except for the data.
That's a really good point. I don't know if people can appreciate the standard chart if they haven't used it, but that's a real good point, because most people in the field operate, number one, with equal interval charts. Equal interval charts means that along the horizontal and vertical axis, they're scaled equally. So you have equal amounts of space, refers to equal amount of changes in whatever you're interested in, so equal intervals. But not only are they equal intervals, most people also are using non-standard charts. How the heck do you take these non-standard charts and lay them on top of one another and compare them?
And that's if they actually measure frequency. I've spent a lot of time looking at graphs, and they have percentage, or they measure something, and it doesn't even go to 100%, or it's a cut scale, and it goes from 40 to 70. So not only are they not standard, they're not necessarily scaled effectively to provide those comparisons, or what one line looks like from 0 to 10 may be the same as 0 to 100, depending on how you create those intervals. So you can manipulate the picture of data by changing that scale.
That's true. It's interesting listening to you talk. There was one thing in here in this article that Lindsley said, and this was McGreevy cited a personal communication, and Lindsley said, without standard units in a standard scale, the measurement of the dependent variables and the change in those dependent variables is a variable itself, and consequently of almost no utility. And that, if people really could understand that, it really speaks to why we need to have, number one, standard displays, and number two, using standard units. Without it, it's almost like this cacophony of noise. It's so hard to, well, again, I don't want to come off too strong, because in a general sense, you can get the idea. Those non-standard equal interval charts will give you a general picture of what's happening in an absolute sense. You can see what's called absolute change. Absolute change means how much is this changing? And if you're just concerned with, okay, is this going up? Is it staying the same? Is it going down? If you're interested in looking at that behavior in an absolute sense, if it's changing, those non-standard equal interval charts can do that job. It's not. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was agreeing with you.
I was going to say, it's not as if you have data that's increasing on a standard acceleration chart, that somehow you put it, on an equal interval chart, you put that on a standard acceleration chart, and all of a sudden it decreases. There's not that kind of radical change. But what you do see is, on equal interval charts, your behavior can look like it's steeply accelerating, but when you look at relative change and you put that on a standard scale, that change is not as impressive as you might think it is. And it's easy to make changes look big. You were talking about earlier manipulating the scale. If you have something that's occurring within, let's say, 1 and 10, if you stretch that scale out between 1 and 10, you can make it look pretty big. But if you have that scaled from 1 to 50, you're going to compress it, and it's not going to look as significant.
Well, I'm looking back in this article, and I really like the example that McGreevy provided with regards to temperature on a thermometer, and I'm just thinking about, it makes it very real to think about, all right, I'm taking a temperature, I can actually see the temperature change on the thermometer, rather than putting a hand on a head and saying it's hotter, and now, oh, is it hotter? And it may not be exact example for what you're trying to say, but the idea of having something being standard, and there's no change in that thermometer. The thermometer moves based on a temperature, based on the movement of that liquid, or in a digital sense now, and well, the liquid here, but the digital sense that it's moving based on a strict temperature rather than relying on things such as my son feels hotter or now he feels cooler, but he might still have a fever relative to the temperature. So,
yes, think about natural sciences.
Mm-hmm.
Natural sciences, one of the reasons why they've been able to make discoveries, and one of the reasons why their discoveries are not transitory as some of the things, or transient, that you can see in some of the social sciences, is they're looking at these fundamental units, and they're putting them on these standard displays, and you can't argue with that data. It's very natural, and the idea is we can do that same thing with behavior. Naturally, our behavior occurs in time. Our behaviors have frequency. Let's take those frequencies and put it on a standard display, which the standard acceleration chart is what we use.
Mm-hmm.
The graphical display, something else that McGreevy talked about, which I liked, he said graphical displays can help researchers and teachers discover the major determinants of behavior. And that's why whatever you're interested in, if you're in psychology, if you're in education, if you're in sociology, chances are you're interested in human behavior or something that human behavior affects, and how can you discover the order or the determinants of those behavior? If you have to somehow muddle through a display that may or may not be giving you the most accurate picture, that's going to affect your ability to understand whatever the phenomena is that you are studying.
And that can be for making a decision on a student's reading performance, to social skills, however you define them, with adults with Down syndrome that are learning life skills. So it goes across for both researchers, as you said, and also the practitioners. So,
and it's exciting. You and I came on to the precision teaching scene after a lot of the people who we know and respect were doing precision teaching in the 70s and in the 80s. And I know in the 70s, that's probably the time where precision teaching was most prolific in terms of just the sheer number of schools that were using it, and maybe membership of professionals. I mean, I don't have hard data on this, but if you look at the volume of, you look at the journals, you look at all the conferences and all the papers and so on, and you talk to people, there's a lot of people that were involved. And boy, I just totally forgot where I was going with this. What was I talking about?
You were saying how we got into it in the 90s, and you were comparing it to this. No problem.
If you think about going back when all of these people were doing it, there were so many discoveries that were being made, and you ask yourself, well, why were all these discoveries being made? Was it just because there were more people doing it, or was it, okay, you have all of these sets of eyes on human behavior that's placed on these standard displays, and it would seem so much easier to make those discoveries when you have all of these people looking at behavior on the same chart.
That is when you sort of pull that together, it just makes sense why things were flowing so quickly then, and maybe I don't know why they didn't catch on or carry on. I'm sure there's a whole story behind that, but to see, it might be the eyes, but like you said, the actual chart itself. So,
and that brings us to what you were talking about earlier. Why did McGreevy write this letter? Why did he write this article? What was his focal point?
Oh, I thought
I'm
you were
asking
asking.
you. Yeah.
You were asking me. Well, he was discussing not only the importance of frequency and the standard celeration chart, but I guess at that time there were variants or slices of the chart that were used, and it was changing, or in his argument was changing the learning picture, just because even though it was using the logarithmic scaling, it was because it wasn't standard, it was losing something in the translation. It wasn't coming back to the metric, the true metric of the standard celeration chart.
Exactly. And I think what happened here, this was written in 84, or was published in 84, so he probably wrote it in 82, 83, or maybe early 84. But my sense is people, well, he talks about this. People were making complaints as to, okay, why can't we use the original standard celeration chart? And it was interesting reading some of these complaints, and I'll just read off a few of them. The teacher would tell us proudly that the child only missed 3 or did all 10 correctly, having collected a count. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here. The teacher would only tell us proudly that the child only missed 3 or did all 10 correctly, having collected a count or count per opportunity without having conducted the timing. So there you have one problem. They didn't measure frequency. Another thing that he talked about, a teacher would refuse to continue conducting timings because, according to him or her, the timings made the children nervous. Have you heard that yet before? I know I have.
The chart makes you nervous?
Well, or the timing makes you nervous. And
yeah. Can I provide a personal anecdote?
Absolutely.
I was working with a child just a couple summers ago, and the parent expressed to me, well, yeah, we want you to do this sort of reading timing, some repeated readings with him, but he gets very nervous and it hates to be timed. And by the end, he not only loved timing, but would run around the house to find his mom and dad to tell them exactly what was going on. So I've heard that from parents, I've heard that from kids, and as soon as the chart and the timings are met with successes, so I'm sorry.
No, that's a great story. And I think whenever people tell me that, timings makes our kids nervous and so on, you actually hit the nail on the head. Why does someone get nervous about something? What's the context of those past encounters with the chart? Obviously, there was probably some contingency there where the student maybe was embarrassed, or everyone who's done in 3 minutes gets to go out to recess, but if you're still working on it, then you have to stay in, or there could be some negative contingency that's associated with the chart.
Or possibly, well, we talked about the chart, but maybe there were some ineffective methods, and I was just
I'm sorry,
never
I said chart,
improving.
I meant to say timings.
Yeah, I may be just using things that are not me. Maybe what was being used in the past were ineffective methods, so the child was never improving. So then the timings got associated with failures, and of course, people don't like to fail. Makes sense.
Yeah. Something else, a few other things that McGreevy talked about, and he's talking about, again, when you are a teacher trainer, I think is the word he's using here, and he talks about the resistance that he encounters. So the first one we said, he hears that some people don't count frequency. Another one is a resistance to doing timings. A third one he lists is, he says a teacher would conduct timings but still insists on charting the frequencies on percent correct. So there you have a case where you could chart frequency, but the teacher says, no, I'm more comfortable with percentage correct, and I want to use percentage correct. Another one is number 4. He talks about a teacher would say that she couldn't mark the chart because the lines were too close together. I've done a number of workshops, and I can't tell you how many times I hear that. Even when I teach the chart in class, invariably someone will point out, these look too small, I can't tell, they're too close together, or something like that. You probably remember we did a workshop together in Chicago a couple years ago, and I remember someone saying that there.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that just always seems to be something that, and it is true, if you look at the chart, it seems like what is true is, okay, the lines are close together, but the idea that the lines are way too close together and therefore I can't use the chart, that's a specious charge.
That's basically, I don't want to change.
Yes, all these are all I don't want to change.
Yeah, I'm content and happy with doing this. I don't want to learn anything new.
Yeah.
But that's probably an argument for another day. So.
Yeah. Well, and just to round this off, the fifth thing he says that he dealt with, the teacher would either incorrectly mark a counting period floor for a counting period of greater than 1 minute, or correctly mark the floor and then count up from the 1 minute. So there you have some errors that people were making. But there's something in here, too, that I've encountered. And, matter of fact, just the other day, we had a chart share for class, and one of the student teachers was saying that they show the student their chart, but they also have a student fill in a bar chart. And I was thinking to myself, no, you really don't need to. The purpose of having one chart is to explain it to the student, tell them why they're doing great, and not have another bar chart. I mean, that basically is like saying, hey, you don't understand this, so let's give you something you can understand.
Yeah, really.
But anyway, looking back at this was written in 1984, and I think here we are in 2009, and you hear the same things. So that really hasn't changed much in all of that time.
It's kind of sad, but it really hasn't. The arguments, the arguments against it, everything. It's just, it could have been written. It could have been written last year and probably had the same. It would have been as important then as it is now, but relative to what's going on now, it doesn't say too much different.
The article goes on to talk about what happens when, as you pointed out, you can cut the chart in half, you can blow it up, or in this article there are two other examples of non-standard charts. You could say that they have they're semi-logarithmic, or they have part of the ratio scale, but they're not standard acceleration charts anymore. And there are problems when you do that. And one of the problems is a frequency multiplier is something that it's a number that you can assign if you're comparing the distance between one frequency and the other. If you go from 1 to 2 on a standard acceleration chart, that would have a frequency multiplier of 2. If you blow up the chart, you can't use that frequency multiplier anymore, because now the chart actually has different dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So it affects it.
Yep.
The other, and again, it's called the standard acceleration chart. It used to be called the standard behavior chart, but it was switched to the standard acceleration chart to highlight acceleration, this incredible measure of behavior, this incredibly underused measure of behavior that looks at behavior as occurring across time. But, and this is something that McGreevy does a nice job of showing, if you look at the acceleration, even though, like if you have a times 1.5 is what he says in the article, if you blow that up, you can still have a 1.5, but what's different is if on a standard acceleration chart, if you run that through 2 weeks, let's say going through 2 weeks, that's 1.5 inches worth of space. If you blow that up, that same line's going to be maybe double that, and it will give you a false impression, and it will suggest that, oh, okay, this looks like much more is going on than really is.
Right, and that's a case where while the metric or the celeration is the same, visual analysis comes into play and can fool you if you aren't versed in what's going on.
Right, and the whole idea about having a standard celebration chart or having a standard graphical display, any kind of standard graphical display, is that when you learn to read it, then you start making judgments on what you see. And the more experience you have, the more efficient you are at analyzing that data, communicating that data forever, and that's where you get the power of having a standard display. And when you mess with that, you lose all of that power. But I think one of the problems is people, again, especially in our field, they're just not used to thinking about standard graphical displays and what the benefits are with that. So you can, I don't want to give a pass to people who do this, but I think that's one of the reasons why it happens, why they might change the chart, because of that reason. Let's see. One thing that I was thinking about when I was reading this is the behavior frequencies in regards to cycles. And I thought, we need to do that more. If you have a standard chart and you're looking at how does behavior occur in cycles, again, that allows you to start referencing certain behaviors or possible interventions in regard to whatever cycle it's in. So if you were measuring, let's just say, some type of aggressive behavior, a child striking another person, what cycle does that occur in? And just by thinking about it in cycles, you can actually really start putting an idea or a nice visual representation on the severity of the behavior depending on the magnitude of that frequency.
Yep.
Well,
actually, and one other thing, and I also wanted to say, by not having a standard celeration chart and using sort of slices of the chart, it limits you for putting, maybe you said this earlier, I'm not sure, but what if you want to count something per day or per 16 hours? You begin to lose the chart because there is such a contracted space available to you. You lose where you put it on the chart by not having all of the by not being able to go, and then you can compare something else that's going on because you can lay another chart on top of it, and you can see the per minute versus the per 16 hours, some other behavior versus some intervention. You can make some comparisons between those that you can't do with just a few aspects of the chart.
Great point. I'm looking at the very first non-standard chart that he shares, and it's scaled from 1 to 200.
Right.
So what happens if your kid reads 230 words in a minute?
Right.
Uh-oh. Think about it. That's, and the other one below it, the next chart goes from 1 to 500. I suppose that's a little bit better, but again, what you lose in these charts is right away you lose the counting time. How can you compare something that occurs in 1 minute versus 5 minutes versus an hour? You can do all of that on a standard acceleration chart, but this chart really handcuffs you. It really constrains what you can chart, and it's people who don't understand the full utility of the standard acceleration chart making their own determination of, okay, for me, this is what's important, and I'm going to take this chart, modify it, and use it. But when they do that, they're really just taking so much away from what they could use and what they could have.
And I think that McGreevy makes that point very clear and concise.
Yes, he does. Well, that's a pretty thorough going over of McGreevy's article. Is there anything else you wanted to say that we didn't talk about?
No, I think I'm just looking forward to the next one. I really enjoy these.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we have an excellent interview today, and our interview is with Alison Moores. And I realized, I think last month I said it was going to be someone else, and of course the lesson that I learned is to not announce who next month's interviewee will be, because our group, like many of our listeners out there, are very busy, and sometimes things come up, and we'll have an interview each month, and but we'll leave that as a surprise.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll call it the super secret special guest.
Yeah. But let's go on to the interview. I would like to welcome Alison Moores to the Precision Teaching Podcast. For those of you who don't know, Alison is the director of the Academy for Precision Learning, and she is also the big part of the private practice for Moores and Associates Consulting. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
I always like to start off my podcast interview by asking my guests, how did they get into precision teaching?
Well, I started working with kids with autism right out of my undergrad, and my undergrad was in general education, so just regular ed kids. I really didn't have any experience in special ed. And then I started working with kids with autism and found applied behavior analysis and went to graduate school at West Virginia University. And I was fortunate enough to have a graduate advisor named Dr. Julie Vargas, and she introduced me to precision teaching through the coursework that I was doing at West Virginia University. And then from there, I went to Seattle. I came to Seattle and started working at Morningside Academy. And that's where I actually learned the most about precision teaching in an applied setting.
Mm-hmm. And I guess people may not know this, but you and I I think that was the first time we met was in Seattle, because I was out there also. I was a graduate student at the time, and Morningside, I think they still have those summer institutes.
They did in 1997, not to date us or anything.
No, that is funny. So who do you consider your chart parent?
Oh, Julie Vargas.
Yes, that makes sense. By the way, I don't know if you've had a chance to see this, but she just came out with a new textbook on behavior analysis and learning, and she did a very nice job with everything, but she gives very good coverage to precision teaching and the standard Celeration chart.
Oh, that's excellent. I knew it was coming out. I just didn't know it was published yet.
Yeah. So can you tell us, what do you do as the director of the Academy for Precision Learning?
Pretty much everything. We're brand new. We just started in the fall of 97, and we had 4 students last year. And then we started this year with 11 students. Now we're up to 13, and it looks like in the fall we'll be at 20 students. So in 2 years, it's multiplied times 5, which means that I basically do everything. So I design the program, but I don't. Basically, I answer the phone, I clean the toilets, I train the teachers, I write the education plans, I set up the technologies that we're using, the data systems, meet with families. I mean, basically administrate the entire program. But because we're growing so fast, we're actually adding new administrative staff, on a monthly basis, which is really exciting. And so next year, actually, I'll just be doing the educational services director position. So that basically is just me, the kids, and the staff, and just figuring out what to chart, how to chart it, how to make database decisions, and how to ensure progress with all of the kids.
Now, you said you have 22 students, or you will have 22 students?
We will. I've offered contracts to 20, actually. We'll see. In this economy, it's kind of hard to be running a nonprofit. So I hope to be at 20 students in the fall.
Wow. And how would you describe your program? So you use precision teaching, and what do you use that with?
Well, basically, we're a kindergarten through 5th grade elementary school, pure private school, and nonprofit-based. But in the state of Washington, there aren't very many funding sources. We don't have a charter school initiative per se, so it's all privately funded by parents and tuition. And we use basically the best practices in applied behavior analysis towards general education curriculum as well as special focus on students with autism.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually base our curriculum on the state standards for Washington State, which actually follow the No Child Left Behind standards. But what we do is we accommodate it for every learner. We have general ed kids and kids with autism. We also have students with attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, kind of a nice mix of everybody. And so in order to maintain the state standards for each grade level, we put a variety of different curriculum in place. We use a lot of direct instruction curriculum, but we also use just district adopted general education curriculum. But the nice part about individualizing it is we put everything on standard acceleration charts. So everything that the students do from the core content areas, plus science, social studies. We teach a friendship class. We also do social skills, behavior management strategies. It's all charted on a standard acceleration chart.
Wow. Now, there's like 20 questions I want to ask you to make sure I start off here. With you generating, this is a logistics question, when you generate that volume of charts, how does that work? Like, in terms of quality control or in terms of you seeing charts and other people, how do you manage all those charts?
Well, we have a pretty significant staff training regime that we go through, and one of the nice things that APL, that's the short version of the Academy for Precision Learning. So at APL, we have a majority of staff training protocol that requires staff to become data analysts. Mm-hmm. So we have, on a monthly basis, they have to go through chart standards on whatever chart they're implementing. And we do timings, weeklies, dailies, and monthlies. And each one of those kind of has a rubric for quality control. Now, the nice part, because I am private and I am, basically running the show, I have performance-based pay contracts, bonuses in the staff's contracts. So in addition to their salary, 3 times a year they have an opportunity for a bonus, and a huge majority of that bonus is quality control for the precision teaching portion. And so they do chart standards monthly. They do database decision-making protocol that we've designed on a monthly basis. I also do in situ evaluations of the students and the teachers doing timings, and then they get feedback for that. But the nice thing, because it's kind of rolled up into a bonus situation, is that once teachers become experts at the charts, according to our standards, then they train each other. Mm-hmm. So I literally cannot, I have 13 staff members right now. I literally cannot get to everybody every month, but it's training the trainer. And because everything is based on the chart, all I do is come up with a set of rubrics that they apply to each standard acceleration chart. And then they come to me when there's a problem rather than me having to supervise everything.
Wow. Now, those bonuses that they get, are those related to ensuring that their charts are following the standards, or are those like merit? It's not merit pay where you have to produce a ×2 or something like that.
No, it's basically and one portion. I break down the contract, the performance-based pay bonus contract, into different sections, and they're weighted differently. So there's an instructional delivery section, which is basically how good are you at doing precision teaching, mm-hmm. and then there's the data analysis section, and there's an organizational management section, and that's how you organizing your charts. Are you following the protocol? More like chart implementation. We do. Every student at my school has a learning plan similar to an individualized education plan, but we just don't call it that because we're not a public school. So Every student has a learning plan that we design within the first month of enrollment, and then every month the parents get full progress data on all learning plan objectives. So every month the staff has to do data reviews with me as they're writing up their progress notes, and in those data reviews, or actually in the learning plan goals and objectives, it promises the parents a certain level of achievement by the end of the year. And so at the end of every month, while the staff is doing data reviews with me, we chart where they are in that progress range towards the end of the year.
Now, with all of these children, and you do a lot of individualized charting, the targets that you pick, are those targets, for example, in reading, maybe everybody gets letter sounds, everybody gets something else, or is it that each teacher decides what are the necessary skills to be put on the chart?
Well, because we're so new, I'm toying around with how much I want to smother mother the curriculum and how much I want to let the teachers design the curriculum. What I'm hoping to do is to just have a set of standards for curriculum-based measurement probes in place. So we use the DIBELS and we use the math computations, the stuff from University of Oregon.
Right.
And what I would like to do is to have the learning plan just show progress on that median level, that meta level of analysis. And then the teachers can design whatever curriculum they want to meet that probing, that CBM probing. But at this point, we also have the grade level standards that we're trying to meet. And we're using the general education curricular standards. And the teachers are designing what they think the daily practice needs to be in order to meet those standards. Mm-hmm. Last year we had kids. We based everything on a fourth grade curriculum last year because that was my one student who was on grade level. This year we have an early elementary class of like first through third graders, and we have an upper elementary class of fourth and fifth graders. So the more we add grades, the more I'm trying to figure out data systems so that I don't have to micromanage and the teachers can figure it out themselves as to what they think the kids need in order to meet that state standard. So I hope in a few years we'll have kind of a tried and true approach, but up until then it's based on my experience teaching, and I kind of direct them to do it. But they're doing a really good job. My second year staff are doing a really nice job coming to me saying he's not meeting his goals based on the monthly probes. We need to do this as a daily practice, and they're doing a really nice job.
That's interesting. I always think when I visit other programs, and I also just think about how precision teaching is done in general, oftentimes you can see the idea of, okay, let's let the child, like the learner knows best. Some people interpret that as, okay, let's just let the child do things. We'll follow the progress of the student, and then we'll go from there. But other times, I see people have some type of structured program, and based on that structured program, okay, these are the specific behaviors that you'll be charting. And it's really interesting listening to you talk and how that plays out in your teacher's experience. And I'm just wondering, are they discovering things that maybe you've already seen, or are they coming up with new things?
I don't know. I think they teach me something new every day. What's nice, too, is that we have our upper elementary kids are fourth and fifth graders, so between the ages of 10 and 12, roughly, and they are actually charting their own data and their own practices, and they're doing peer coaching. So they're actually coming up with some really nice interventions for themselves.
That's great.
And one of the things we, school-wide in our friendship curriculum, and we teach a lot about tolerance and diversity, because I have some students who don't have disabilities and some students who have significant disabilities. So we have to do a lot of talking about strengths and weaknesses on an individual basis. And what's nice is that what we're trying to do is to teach kids to advocate for themselves across the board. And so I'm hearing the upper elementary kids, and some of my first and second graders are saying, I think I want to do a 10-second timing instead of a 30-second timing, and this is why. And they're talking it through with their teachers. Because we are still so small, I'm seeing a lot of that happen. I just don't want to say that that's our protocol yet until our class sizes get bigger, because I want to see, there's no way that the teachers can manage the data once they have 16 or 20 kids in a class the way that they're managing it now that they have 5 or 6 kids in a class. So I'm trying to figure out those big bang for your buck pinpoints.
Yes.
That get you, a lot of intervention strategies for, say, 1 or 2 charts worth of work. So it's evolving. I mean, that's the nice thing about precision teaching too, that, I just keep saying, put it on a chart. Like, there is no such thing as a bad intervention. It's just not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And so one of the protocol is that no more than 5 data points on a chart before there's an intervention. So one of the things that the staff has to do is evaluate each other to make sure that there's not 3 weeks worth of data with no interventions that are flat. So every 5 days, they either have to make it harder, make it easier, or figure out what's going on. And so what's nice is that sometimes, if the data are going up and accelerating after 5 days, they know that there has to be a phase change line there in order to meet the rubric criterion. And so they'll try to figure out how to get them to accelerate faster. rather than just sit back and wait, I guess, we do more of a proactive approach, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Your program, you said a lot of it is designed to meet the state standards.
Yep.
So each year you have some type of, like for example, here in Pennsylvania we have the PSSAs. You have something like that your students have to take?
Well, in the state of Washington, we have the Washington Assessment for Student Learning, the WASL, but actually they just, after this recent election, we have a new superintendent of public instruction, and they just did away with the WASL as of 2010. And I actually haven't even looked into what the new state required assessment is. What we do at APL is we have a multi-level system of assessment where we do pre-post national norming on the Woodcock-Johnson, and then we have the curriculum-based measurement probes and curriculum-based assessment probes, and then we have the daily day-to-day practice. So I was originally going to look to see if I could become a WASL. You can, as a private school, petition to give the WASL, but now that we don't have the WASL anymore, I'm waiting for kind of the politics to die down. But I do want to make some local norming with the Woodcock-Johnson, because I have kids from 8 different school districts, and I want to make sure whenever they leave me after 5th grade, that they're not going to fail whatever the state assessment is in 7th grade.
I see. I'm wondering, how do you collect the outcome data on your students? And I don't mean that. I know you have lots of charts, but do you measure like an outcome, like some type of yearly summary measure? Like if you had the WASL, then that would be, okay, this year the kids did whatever. Do you have something like that you look at?
Yeah, right now I'll have my first set of post-test data in June. So right now we're just using the Woodcock-Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And what's nice is that I had 4 students last year. 2 of them were not their skill sets would not show up on a Woodcock-Johnson, so we used some other measurements for them. Mm-hmm. The 2 students that I did use the Woodcock-Johnson with, I'm considering that their pre-test scores. And so now I'll see in this June, that'll be my first round of post-tests on the Woodcock-Johnson, just to see where we are. But I'll also do an analysis of their curriculum-based measurement probing and start presenting those assessments. But when I do presentations of outcomes, I'm going to use that macro, meta, micro level. So here's where they did on national pre-post once-a-year assessments. Here's where they did on their weekly curriculum-based measurement probes, and here's where they did on their daily. So that might be, number of learning plan objectives met, or we might do like an analysis of, maybe a Celeration analysis, depending on, I have a wide variety of skill sets for kids. I have some pretty significantly impacted kids with autism, and I have some kids who are gifted. So it's going to be a little hard, not hard, but a little tricky to try to figure out one measurement for that wide variety of students. Where, the majority of my student body may not show up on a Washington State assessment. And in public school, they might not even be given that. They'd be given an alternative assessment. So I'm just going to try to take as much data as I can with things that are already published and see where it kind of averages out. I was thinking about doing the Iowa. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Have you had a chance to make any summary statements in regards to like Dibbles or CBM? Do you see what would be a Celeration your students might expect to see across the year?
I could probably tell you that at the end of this year.
Okay.
I just had one student last year, and he did really, really well, and he was my only general ed 4th grade student, but he was also a client of mine since kindergarten, so I'm not exactly sure how much of that was he had done a home program with me for so long, and we got the benefit of that at APL last year. So I have a number of students this year who I never met until the day they set foot at APL. So I kind of want to reserve a little bit of judgment until I see those kids and what their outcome data are. I do know that the majority, especially on the Dibbles probe, the majority of my students, even my general ed 1st grader this year, had to start at the pre-primer level. And we also use the qualitative reading inventory, the QRI, as an assessment. And because of the reading comprehension requirements of those, I had to go back like 2 or 3 grade levels below where they chronologically were because they just didn't understand the task. And then we put a lot of daily practice in place as far as how do you recall details, those types of things. The majority of those students are now either on grade level according to that assessment or 1 year ahead.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, but I would have to go back and see, do the analysis of that at the end of the school year to see exactly what that means, because I think it was a problem. I think it might be a problem with the measurement tool, not necessarily their learning acceleration. So
I am really excited. I just thought about something for our listeners who aren't into education jargon. DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicators of, what is it, Basic
Early literacy
skills. Yes, thank you. And that, when you get that system, you get this little booklet, and the booklet has, it's a neat package when I think about it. It has what has the stories inside it. Like, let's say you're doing progress monitoring for first grade, and there'll be X amount of stories in there, and there's a little, I guess it'd be an equal interval chart on the book, and each week you could put your students, whatever their score is, and then there's like a bullseye on there which shows you where your student needs to get to. It's neat. It's a neat package, but I am just really interested in seeing people like yourself who, rather than put it on that, start putting it on I guess you're using weekly charts for your CBM or your DIBELS?
Yeah, we'll use both. We'll use what the DIBELS provides, but we also put everything on a weekly per week. What I'm noticing though, and I hope the DIBELS folks don't get mad at me, but we use it weekly, and the way that the booklet is designed, I believe it's designed for either report card periods, so let's say 3 or 4 times a year. So we run out of materials because we do it weekly. So that's why I've kind of paired it up with another assessment, like a qualitative reading inventory, because between the two of them, they're doing 2 oral reading fluency assessments that's somewhat graded a week. But I just kind of have to go back to see if one is more helpful than the other with the way that we're designing curriculum, because there's no way I'm going to wait for 3 months to start doing curriculum-based measurement probing. But if I had 25 or 30 kids in a general ed class, then there's no way you can do it weekly. So we're trying to figure out a happy medium.
I am very fascinated by your, did you call it the Friends? What'd you call it? The Friends intervention?
We do a friendship class every day.
Friendship class. Tell me about, now, is that something you just do, or you actually chart that?
We chart everything, Rick.
Great. There are just not enough social behaviors charted.
Yeah.
And if you don't chart it, it's really hard to get your hands on where are you going, what's it look like.
Yeah, so we have a 20-minute class a day that we call friendship class. And usually I should probably back up for the listeners. I have 3 levels of student body. I have either students who are purely typical, no diagnosis, general education students, and then I have students who do have a diagnosis but can fit into a general education class with just a little more support, and those would be more like your students with attention deficit disorder or high functioning autism, Asperger's disorder. And then I also have a percentage of my population who are more classically on the autism spectrum, who require one-on-one services. The majority of those students in their learning plans have specific social intervention goals, like, am I listening to my peers? Am I answering my peers? Am I following directions of my peers? Those types of things. So what happens with those one-on-one students is they're pulled out to do very intense, specific precision teaching for a certain portion of the day. And then once their skill set is at a place on their, we do RESA, so we're fluency-based instructors. And so once they've passed some of their retention, endurance, stability, or application goals, then what we also do is add a usability goal to it. So then we take whatever that skill is that they learned in one-on-one instruction and apply it. So that friendship class is a really good place where all the kids are together at the same time, and it's a place for my one-on-one kids to practice their new skills, and it's a place for my general education students who also have a learning plan to practice their leadership skills, and we do it around some sort of a central theme. My upper elementary students are doing more social problem solving and social behavior mapping. My lower elementary kids, if we're teaching about say St. Patrick's Day, and we're doing all these crafts and things around Ireland and things like that. We do that together as a group, arts and crafts, those types of things, but it's less academic and more social interaction based, and then all those social interactions are charted. And the regular education students have to have leadership objectives met, and so their social skills objectives are leadership scores, and then the kids with significant disabilities, it's just do they answer questions or whatever their individual goals are, and those are put on standards. All of those are put on standard Celeration charts.
Wow, that is phenomenal.
Wow. I don't know how effective it is yet. I'll let you know that at the end of the year after this year.
I love the idea of friendship classes.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, my general education students need it just as much as those kids with autism, I got to tell you.
Mm-hmm. When I used to work directly with students, there was a program that I followed for social skills, and it was a book. I think it's still published. It might be in the second or third edition, but it was from the Boys Town curriculum, and what they did is they had a list of social skills, and they broke them down into levels. So they had basic skills, I think intermediate skills, and then complex skills. But it was interesting because the basic social skills were things like following instructions, accepting criticism. And at the time that I was implementing that, I should have charted it, but I didn't. It was more like role playing and just getting people to learn it. But that is something that all children need more of, and it's just really...
Well, and what we do is we kind of just talk about what naturally occurs anyway in social situations. And so in my upper elementary class, we use a curriculum by Michelle Garcia Winner called Social Behavior Mapping. And they talk about expected and unexpected behaviors and how your expected or unexpected behaviors make other people feel and how that then interacts how you feel. So, it's very good for, like I said, the general ed kids because, sometimes you don't know why you just made your friend mad. And you know that you're fighting on the playground, but you're not quite sure why. And so this just kind of demystifies social interaction. And so we can kind of look at that behavior chain that occurs, kind of interpersonally. And we do it for everybody. But then we also look at it as kind of, this is how we want the classroom environment to be. So these are expected and unexpected behaviors for the classroom environment. And what's really nice is that the students actually get friendship points throughout the day. And these are goals, and we all have point systems in place. And they actually get extra points if they're pointing out the expected behaviors of others. So they'll raise their hand and say, I see so-and-so doing an expected behavior because he just followed your directions, Miss Valerie, who's the teacher. And so the student who pointed that out gets a point for noticing, and the student who's doing it gets a point for following. So it creates this really nice culture that everybody is talking about what they're expecting everybody else to be doing. And they also point out the unexpected behaviors, but it's not the teacher having to nag, it's the kids kind of monitoring each other. So it's really nice. And we just, you put a name to it and you set up the vocabulary and the kids just follow suit. And then we just take the data as it goes.
That's excellent. It just produces a warm feeling thinking about getting friendship points. I love it.
We call this warm fuzzies.
Yeah. Now, do you have speech and language pathologists and occupational therapists? Do they come in your school?
No, we're way not big enough for that yet. But what I do have is a kind of a collaborative approach in general, just with the way that I designed the program, that if, as we're designing the learning plans or as we're going in our data analysis throughout the year, if anybody wants to submit input, private OT, private speech, private ABA therapy, anything, they're welcome to come in and have a meeting and input their findings or whatever. And I'm in constant contact with a lot of related service personnel. We just don't employ them at our school at this point.
Yeah, well, my follow-up question was going to be, if they do come in, would they also have to maintain charts and so on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't have to ask that question.
Well, at this point, I don't even have a janitor, so I'm thinking I'm going to hire that person first before I hire a speech pathologist.
Oh, you really do wear a lot of hats and gloves, too. Are you looking for teachers, I imagine, for the upcoming year?
Yes, we are. We're actually pursuing certifications in a variety of different areas. I did mention before that the state of Washington does not have a formal charter school initiative. They do have these public-private partnerships, but you have to be only affiliated with one school district. And as I said, I have students from multiple school districts. But what we can do is become a non-public agency. And if we become a non-public agency, then a school district, through the IEP process, can place a student with us and pay tuition as an out-of-district placement. So in order to do that, I have to have so many certificated teachers. Mm-hmm. Right now, I have general ed certified teachers, and we just hired a new head of school, and he actually has his special ed certification. But we're actually looking to expand to middle school as well to become a K through 8 program. So I believe at this point, depending, like I said, on how many of the contracts I get back for enrollment, I'm looking for a middle school special ed certified teacher is what I'm looking for now. And then I also have board certified behavior analysts on staff as teachers. So I like that mix between you have the education background, you have the science background, because we are a real big mix of both. So I also have a need for one-on-one instructors. And what's nice about us is that we just moved to the University of Washington area called the U District. And at the University of Washington, there are a number of graduate programs that list us as a practicum site. And so if somebody works for me as a one-on-one paraeducator, they can actually count that as a paid practicum site, a paid internship. And also because I'm a board certified behavior analyst, people can also get obtain their 1,500 supervisory hours in order to sit for the test with me. So my paraeducators tend to be either recent or current graduate students, which is really nice.
How, with possibly opening up to those other grades and all these other people coming in, are your facilities maxed out? I mean, are you going to have to move, or do you have enough space to accommodate everybody?
Right now, it's really nice. We're in this beautiful old building that's still technically owned by the Seattle School District, but it's a historic landmark built in, I think, 1902. It's this old wooden schoolhouse. It's great. It's managed by the University Heights Community Center, which is actually trying to purchase the building from the Seattle School District. Once they do that, they're going to bring it up to code and create it to be a center for children's nonprofits. So we have an opportunity to grow within the current building that we have right now. I have 2 classrooms right now. We have the ability to grow up to between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet. Just depends on which classrooms I commandeer. Eventually, once we get up to full capacity K through 8, there's no way we can take up this entire building. So in the next couple of years or so, if we continue to grow the way that we are going to have to look at a standalone capital campaign for a building. But right now, it's this great space with a lot of children's programs, and they're very supportive of us. They're very supportive of my students. And we can grow at least 2 to 3 more classrooms without having to move.
So how'd you come up with the name Academy for Precision Learning?
Everybody asks me that. Do you remember Jen Manring?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, well, she and I were sitting at a bar in Pittsburgh, and I was trying to figure out, this was in 1999, 2000, because I originally wrote the business plan in 2000. And so for everybody who doesn't know her, she's I met her when I worked at Morningside, excellent Morningside Academy teacher. And so we were sitting there trying to figure out, and I have all these things that are like Apple related, because when I was an undergraduate teaching major, everybody thought it was fun to buy me apples all the time, like anything that had anything to do with apples. Mm-hmm. So I wanted something that said Apple. And so we wanted the A, the P, and the L to signify Apple, because that's our symbol. And so I wanted precision in there somewhere, and I wanted it to sound like a real school. So we just sat there at a bar in Pittsburgh and with the bar napkin and just jotted down as many different acronyms as we could, and we came up with APL.
That's great. Because
it spells apple.
When you were saying apple, I'm like, oh, you mean the computers.
No, I mean like the fruit. And
yes.
if you're not a teacher and you're not used to getting all the teacher gifts that have a million different apples on them, then you don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I teach the older kids, and about the only thing they do is throw apples at me.
Well, and our little logo is a lime green apple, and I keep saying that I'm threatening that we're going to come up with a mascot and we're going to be the bobbing apples.
You are exceptionally busy as the director with APL. How do you find time for your private practice?
That's a very good question. Since I had been planning this school in my head for 10 years before it actually started, so I always knew that I was going to get to the point where the private practice kind of had to take a backseat to the school. So I had been paring down individual client caseloads for a couple of years before we started. But then also, I was also looking in the private practice at being more of the outreach person anyway. So a huge passion and love of mine is to work in developing countries and to travel and to see kind of how behavior analysis, precision teaching, good instruction can impact people with no resources or different education levels. So a big portion of what I did was more school district contracts and contracts going into developing countries to help from a systemic approach. So one of my main goals, one of the reasons why we did hire a head of school so soon into APL's livelihood is because I want to back up and come up with some kind of a dissemination model, because I would love to have an inclusion-based model that school districts or different organizations can either purchase or get trained in, very similar to what Morningside Academy does with their teacher training in the Morningside model of generative instruction. I'd like to do that because I see a lot of school districts and specifically say, yes, we need to do inclusion. Yes, it's the best practice for students with and without autism. Yes, we need to include them in our general ed curriculum, but there's no model for what to do. So they hire really good teachers, and then God forbid that teacher leave, then the model goes with them. So there's no there's no meat to the program. It's just person specific rather than systemic, a systemic approach. So one thing I want to do then is to back up from having to run the day-to-day operations of the school, figure out what is replicable within the model without having to tell people you have to buy this curriculum or buy that or something, just so I can go to any school district or any country and say, here are the hallmarks, taking data. Direct instruction in and of itself is a copyrighted term, but choral responding, most cultures around the world are oral cultures. And so getting teachers to create lessons that have a group choral responding approach and then taking data from there, that's what my teachers are doing now. Like, we have general ed, social studies, and science curriculum, but they're making direct instruction board work with that content. So that's what I'm hoping my private practice will turn into is more of helping other people with inclusion models. And, because not everybody can afford my tuition, and we can't take every kid out there who wants a quality inclusion program. So I'm hoping to make a little bit of a mark in my private practice with that. But I also have 10 contractors that are working with me, and they do the majority, the lion's share of the work in the private practice. And then I just come in and I'm kind of the big picture girl. Mm-hmm. But that's all going to change next school year because I'm backing up of the day-to-day operations. So I don't sit still very well either.
Your private practice, you're consulting with families, but you also consult with organizations?
Yes. It's kind of at the bare bones right now because for the past 2 years I haven't taken on any new contracts. But before I started the school, the majority of it was school systems and family systems and doing workshops for parent organizations and helping set up inclusion experiences for a single child in a school, or helping a school district with their, as a board certified behavior analyst to go in and do functional behavior assessments and things like that. But we all know in this field that the majority of behavior problems are from ineffective instruction. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I did was just try to brainstorm with the teachers how to help them systematize their instruction a little more so the kids didn't have to misbehave. And that's kind of my passion.
Have you had success when you go into these systems? Have you had success in teaching teachers to chart and seeing that maintain?
Yes and no. The experiences that I was having prior to APL were in developing countries where, in Africa, they kill the kids because they think they're possessed and want the ancestors. Right. Okay, so it really wasn't about the little blue chart at that point. But I did teach, people how to take data by dropping rocks in a bucket every time the kid asked for juice at the refrigerator. And then at some point, we got to the point where they were graphing it. what was nice, I did a contract with the Honolulu School District for, I went out there once a month for about 3 years. And it was nice because I was not hired to be the precision teaching person in the school district. I was hired to just kind of help them see, what best practices were for kids with autism according to the mainland standards. And so I would show them a variety of different ways of taking data and graphing data. And most teachers will take data, they just don't graph it or make database decisions based on it. So I would put up Excel charts and I would put up this, that, equal interval, whatever. And I would always be talking about precision teaching, but I would always say there's no way I'm going to teach you how to do that because one day a month is not supporting a precision teaching program enough. So I had teachers begging me to show them how to chart on a chart by the end of it, which was really nice. So I had one teacher who actually, she was the head of the Honolulu Teachers Union. So I don't know, 50,000 teachers or however many there were. And I refused to teach her how to chart because she wasn't even taking data at that point. And so I taught her how to do an Excel graph. And I went back to her classroom the next month, and she had like wallpapered her walls with Excel graphs. And I still wouldn't teach her how to do precision teaching because my contract was coming to an end. And she came to my summer program that summer and sat in my program for 5 days and taught herself.
Wow.
So I actually haven't maintained contact with her, so I don't really know if she's maintaining it or not.
When you're in Honolulu, what do they give you instead of apples? They give you like macadamias.
Well, no, I learned how to surf there, so I became quite the surfer girl. So people would call me in the morning and say, "Hey, if you wanted to show up half an hour late because the waves are crashing, we'll cover for you." I'm like, "I'm not showing up for my presentation a half an hour late so I can surf." It was more for that.
Oh, that's great. Well, we are coming towards the end of the interview. Is there anything that I should have asked you or anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
No. I mean, I don't know. I seem like I talked a lot this past 45 minutes, but I do want to say that like Academy for Precision Learning is not, I'm not doing anything that other people aren't already doing. I'm just kind of packaging it in a K through 5 model. So, it's basically like stand on the shoulders of giants. Like what I learned from Kent Johnson and Joanne Robbins and Sue Momquist from Morningside Academy, and then from Julie Vargas, and just kind of when I go around to all these different presentations at conferences and things like that, I take little pieces of what precision teachers are doing elsewhere and just putting it in a new spin on it. And so that's my favorite thing about precision teaching, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. You just use the chart to kind of master your craft and further hone your craft. And so I think if any of the listeners wanted to come see APL, they probably wouldn't be all that surprised by what we're doing because you've seen it somewhere else. And I think that's the beauty of this community.
I think you're being humble because when you think about statistics, and this is, well, right now it's not a happy statistic, but if you think about public schools or private schools, and you think about how many of those do things like direct instruction, which I would characterize as probably a bigger organization than us, very few people do that. And then when you think about how many people do what we do, it's much smaller. So the things that you're doing and your mixture of putting things together, I'm sure is unique. And one of these days, I'd definitely love to come out and take a tour of your school and see all the great things that you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. It's interesting. One of my teachers right now is on a 2-year sabbatical from Honolulu, so she's about to leave in June, and she's starting to say now that there's no way she can go back to the teacher that she was before without using the chart. So your question about follow-up and sustainability, I think she's going to be kind of like my pilot model to see if she can go back to a community that is not a precision teaching community and make it work in her classroom. I have very high hopes for her.
Yeah, but that question I ask, I'm always interested in seeing how can we facilitate people continuing to, because there's a lot that's involved. There's the upfront time to learn it, and then there's all the variables to sustain it. And if you happen to be in a culture or in an area where that's not valued and you have other things to do, then the charting's not likely to maintain. But sometimes it does, and it's always interesting looking at why does that happen.
Yeah, and I hope that the fact that we're a practicum site for so many, really eager, smart graduate students, I'd like to see what happens after they leave us as well. Just do they take the chart with them? Even if it's one portion of the charting, say it's the CBM measure or something, just to see what does maintain.
Yeah, there's still so much work to be done in our field.
Oh
But,
yeah, that's why I'm in it, because I don't sit still very well.
well, I would like to thank you for spending time with me, and I also thank you on behalf of all of our listeners. This was a very informative interview, and also, again, just like to express how pleased I am and just how wonderful it is to hear about all the great work you're doing for your learners.
Well, thank you. It's very humbling for you to ask.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll talk with you later.
Okay, thanks.
Well, that was an awesome interview, and we both thank Alison or Allie is her friends call her. We both thank her for spending her time with us in the interview. And Doug and I guess the one announcement that we forgot to mention that we will say to all of you, we plan on attending a workshop by Edward Tufte, and Doug has kindly dubbed Edward Tufte the godfather of graphing, which is a very apt analogy. I wish I would have came up with that. And Edward, he has written a number of books on just the importance of graphical data display, and maybe you and I will be able to bring something back from that and share it with our listeners next month.
So it's kind of like a Podcast Manna field trip.
Absolutely. And
all right.
Too bad we couldn't do more of them, but
yeah,
maybe we'll have to start branching out and having people like Tufte on as a guest.
Oh, that would be exciting. Very exciting.
Well, on behalf of Doug, I would like to thank all of you for listening, and we look forward to talking with you or talking at you next month.
Have a good one.